On behalf of everyone at the Rutgers Equine Science Center, I would like to welcome you to our 30th Annual Evening of Science and Celebration. For the first time in this event's history, we are all gathered tonight virtually for what we know is going to be a full and exciting program. My name is Jennifer Weinert, and I'm a PhD candidate in Dr. Carrie Williams' lab, and I will serve as the MC for tonight's event. I would also like to introduce you to Kyle Hartman, Public Relations Specialist at the Equine Science Center, who will help with any technical difficulties that you might have. If at any time during the night you have issues with sound or video or anything else, please reach out to Kyle via the chat option at the bottom of your screen, and he will get right back to you. I would now like to turn it over to Dr. Karyn Malinowski, Founding Director of the Equine Science Center, for her director's welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I'm going to share my screen if I may. Okay, and I certainly echo Jennifer's welcome comments. I miss all of you in person. I miss being at the campus center with 200 of you and your families and friends and our wonderful meals that we always have. But we promise that we will continue to deliver our message of better horse care through research and education to all of you this evening, even though we have to do this virtually. So again, welcome to our virtual evening of science and celebration. I would like to introduce some special guests that we have with us this evening. First, our Rutgers University Board for Equine Advancement co-chairs, Dr. Amy Butevich and Mr. Warren Zimmerman. Hi guys, we had a board meeting at noon today, so I think the Rubia members have been equine science centered to pieces today. I'd also like to welcome Melissa McKillop, who is the Vice Dean for Advancement and Associate Dean from the Office of Philanthropy and Strategic Partnerships for the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences. Dr. Wendy Kowick, welcome Wendy. Well, Wendy is been at these meetings before in her former role as the chair of the Department of Animal Sciences. She now has moved up to a new position in administration at the school and the experiment station. She is the Senior Associate Director for the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station and Director of Research for SEBS. I think Dr. Carol Bagnell is here, the Department Chair of the Department of Animal Sciences. Roz Bieberman is with us. She is our Leadership Gifts Officer. And we also have with us representing the New Jersey 4-H Horse Project Advisory Committee, Stella Almeida, one of our dear friends. So thank you, Stella, for joining us this evening. And we have our award winners. This is probably, we have to wait for it for a while, but it's one of the most exciting parts of our evening. Lynn Matthews from the New Jersey Department of Agriculture will receive the Spirit of the Horse Award. And Kelly Munns is, on behalf of Centenary University, accepting the Gold Medal Horse Farm Award. I personally would also like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Williams, Dr. McKeever, who are here this evening. We are a wonderful team doing cutting edge research to help you and your horses and your horse farm stay viable. Our staff, Kyle Hartman. Kyle, I can't thank you enough. Jennifer Weinert and Ellen Rankins, our two PhD students who are doing a fabulous job getting us through all of this pandemic times, because we have been delivering programming to you guys since March. We have not stopped. And even though they're not here with us tonight, our student volunteers have also been helping us behind the scenes. We have a phenomenal team, and we certainly couldn't do it without all of you. So if I can move on. So I mentioned Rubia, the Rutgers University Board for Equine Advancement, and we did have a board meeting this afternoon. Rubia's mission is to assist the Equine Science Center in its decisions regarding its equine teaching, research, and outreach programs, and to promote and support these activities through fundraising and advocacy efforts. Our current chairs are Dr. Amy Butevich, Mr. Warren Zimmerman. Our past chairs or chairs emeriti are Sandy Donarski, Taylor Palmer Jr., and Reich Sudam. We have a very eclectic group right now of members, a wonderful working group. Randy Burrows, Christopher Cody, Dr. Mike Figaro, Beth Gates, John Gertica, Sam Landy, Megan Lamp, Max Spann Jr., and Jennifer Weinert is our grad student rep. So it's a great working group, and they continue to support the center and its efforts. So thank you all for the wonderful board meeting today, and thanks for joining us this evening. So we in COVID times, we all thought that this wasn't going to be such a great time to be trying to raise money for the Equine Science Center, but we have been successful, ladies and gentlemen. And before I mention Giving Day, which was held during the month of the horse on June 17th of this year, we were, thanks to Governor Richard Cody, we were able to acquire again $95,000 from the state in a line item to the Equine Science Center in the FY21 budget, which Governor Murphy did not line item or redline or veto. So we have $95,000 coming to us again this year. Thank you, Governor Cody. And this money will be used for some capital improvements that we do need. Having said that, we also had a wonderful 24-hour Rutgers Giving Day campaign, and I was extremely pleased with the outpouring. We raised over $30,000 in that 24-hour period, and the donors were mixed. So we had support from our RUBIA members. We had support from alumni and friends, such as yourselves. And we also had an outpouring thanks to the aggressive pushing by the Standard Breeders and Owners Association of New Jersey. We had a huge amount of support from the SBOA. And so thanks to Al Oshner and the board members of the SBOA for that help as well. But we were, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, big shout out to Sam Landy and UMH Properties. Sam has, for the last several years, given us a $10,000 challenge match, where he will match up to every dollar that we raise up to $10,000 with $10,000. And so we were able to push ourselves. This slide is not showing the final total, but we approached about $32,000. And the RUBIA board decided early on before this Giving Day that all of the monies that we raised for the next 2 years through RUBIA would go into the newly formed Equine Research Fund to fund the Equine Assisted Activities and Therapies Research Project to help veterans with PTSD. And so, again, thanks to all of you who have supported us in these endeavors. And again, guys, while we continue to deliver these programs for you at no charge, we certainly would appreciate there is no donation too small, and all of your good outreach to us and helping us support our good work is very much appreciated. So we did begin in all of the activities that we normally do face-to-face. We did them all virtually. The first one was our Equine Science Center Virtual Summer Showcase, and it worked out very well. All of these events have ended up working out well. Dr. McKeever gave us a wonderful tour of the Equine Exercise Phys Lab, including a video of a horse on the treadmill. Dr. Williams gave us her wonderful anatomy lesson. Jennifer Weinert led us through an equine quiz Jeopardy game that she normally does. We have used Kahoot now very successfully. And Ellen Rankins also shared some of her new behavior work, some of the pilot study work that she's doing. So it worked out very, very well. And then Kyle and Jen came up with a neat idea of Equine Trivia Tuesdays for kids. And this was an initiative that was held every Tuesday night in the month of August. Supposed to be between the ages of 8 and 16. It was run through Kahoot and on a variety of topics from biosecurity to anatomy to behavior and basic nutrition. What we've found, ladies and gentlemen, throughout these endeavors is that people are very appreciative that they don't have to drive to New Brunswick, number one. But number two, we are reaching out to people all over the world. And on Equine Trivia Tuesdays, we had every week a father-daughter team from Saratoga Springs. We had a young woman from Texas, and we had a sister team from Las Vegas, Nevada, every single Tuesday. So again, we are expanding our reach to people by using this virtual format. But again, thanks, Jen, for all the hard work on this, and Kyle for helping us get through this. And Kahoot did work. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot myself. The biosecurity was pretty tough, Jen. And then we began on August 13th our fall equine webinar series. And I kicked it off talking about the care and management of the older horse. I want to thank Dr. McKeever and Dr. Williams for also providing lectures during this webinar series. But we also had three very good friends of the Equine Science Center contribute. Dr. Leslie Serafin gave a wonderful lecture on biosecurity. Ed Wengren from New Jersey Farm Bureau talked about issues facing the future of the horse industry in New Jersey, including right to farm. And Dr. Brian Cahoon gave a fabulous, fabulous lecture on equine acupuncture. And then we ended that session last Thursday evening with our first ever Ask the Experts Live. It was a panel. People did submit to Jennifer questions ahead of time, so it was very well organized. Dr. Mike Figaro joined us as our expert veterinarian. I joined Dr. McKeever and Dr. Williams, and Dr. Westendorf also joined us. And Dr. Westendorf had a lot of questions on manure management. So our first ever Ask the Experts Live program was very successful. And we kicked off yesterday on Veterans Day. We are doing a crowdfunding fundraising campaign through the end of the year. You know, it'll end over the holidays, probably ending January 1st of 2021. Our goal is $10,000. We have a challenge match from Foundation Equine Wellness and Performance. Dr. Dan Keenan is matching $2,500. And so the first $2,500 that we raise will be matched dollar for dollar by Foundation Equine. So thanks, Dan and colleagues, for that support. We're doing this in contrast to our Rutgers Giving Day, which is more for the high-end donor. A $5 donation is not too small. So this is ongoing. Kyle will give the link to this crowdfunding site in the chat, and we look forward to carrying this out. Again, we launched this on Veterans Day yesterday, and this money will go toward the research project looking at the effects of equine-assisted activities and therapies on the impact of the well-being of veterans with PTSD. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Ms. Weinert.
Thank you. As we move into our speakers for this evening, I would like to remind our attendees that we will be handling any questions that you have for our speakers using the chat feature. You may type your questions into the chat at any point during each of the presentations, and all questions will be directed to our speakers at the end of their presentation. Now, it is time to introduce our keynote speaker of the evening, Dr. Karyn Malinowski. Dr. Malinowski is the founding director of the Rutgers Equine Science Center at the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. Dr. Malinowski has served as a faculty member at the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences since 1978 in various roles, including as an extension specialist in equine sciences, animal sciences professor, founding director of the Equine Science Center, and director of Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Dr. Malinowski played a lead role in building the equine science program at Rutgers University and in the formation of the Rutgers Equine Science Center. Her research and extension programs concentrate on improving the well-being and quality of life of the equine athlete while ensuring the vitality and viability of the equine industry, both statewide and nationally. Dr. Malinowski is the author of over 50 refereed journal articles and abstracts and numerous book chapters. Her expertise in the area of aging and stress management in horses has resulted in her speaking at numerous international venues. Dr. Malinowski is a recipient of many awards, including the American Society of Animal Science Equine Science Society Equine Award, the United States Harness Writers Association Unsung Hero Award, the Governor's Trophy for Horseperson of the Year, Rutgers Graduate School Lifetime Achievement Award, Outstanding Equine Educator Award from the Equine Nutrition and Physiology Society, the Marjorie Vaness Award from the American Horse Council, Research Excellence Impact Award from Cook College and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, Woman of Distinction from the Delaware Raritan Girl Scout Council, and the New York Farmers Club Award from the Northeastern Agricultural Society for her contributions to agriculture. Her lecture this evening is titled Equine Welfare, A New World for Equine Athletes. Welcome, Dr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Ms. Weinert, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for those kind words. Wow. Those of you who have followed my career or have known me a long time know that I've had a passion for looking at over the well-being of horses, stress management of horses, and the well-being of horses for my entire career. And so I'm very pleased to be able to give this presentation to you this evening. And again, because of my passion for this topic, our mission of the Equine Science Center is better horse care through research and education to ensure the well-being of the equine athlete and that of the horse industry. I was asked to do this presentation for a veterinary conference in Brazil in July, which was also virtual. And boy, since I gave this in July, things have changed, and I will be updating you this evening on things that have been occurring daily in the world of equestrian sport. I'm going to be focusing on 3 areas this evening. One is the ethics of the use of drugs and medications and other procedures in equestrian sport. Secondly, the principles of equine welfare. And lastly, catastrophic injuries in horses and what is currently being done. So I'll begin with an eye on horse racing. Horse racing has come under increased scrutiny in the last several years, beginning with in 2011, 2012, the fall winter meet at Aqueduct Racecourse in Queens, Long Island, Queens, New York. This was conducted primarily on the winter inner dirt surface at Aqueduct Racehorse, where we had 21 fatalities during training and racing during that meet. We then had a lot of press at Santa Anita Park in California through the December 2018, March 2019 meet, where we had 23 fatalities in thoroughbred racehorses, both during racing and also in training. And this was also a piece that was shown recently before this current Belmont track meet to shut down New York horse racing tracks now. But to update you on what's happened since then, on October 30th, and to show you that this issue is not going away, ladies and gentlemen, on October 30th, it was reported that the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, recently purchased stock in 4 companies that own racetracks, with the sole intention of buying enough stock to ensure them to get a seat on the board of directors of those companies so that they can have a say in what goes on regarding horse racing. And so some issues for PETA are the installation of synthetic racetracks, synthetic surfaces at racetracks, which has been demonstrated repeatedly to be a safer surface than either dirt or turf. Banning trainers with multiple medication violations, that may be a good idea. And also banning whipping outright. Here in New Jersey, there were new whipping rules instated for thoroughbred racing in September at Monmouth Park, and also on November 6th for harness racing. Things such as talking about how many times you actually can strike a horse, where you can strike a horse, when during a race you can strike a horse, etc. As of today, we know that the Jockeys Guild has appealed this decision on the thoroughbred side, and so this is going actually to the courts. We also have seen this week that at Zia Racecourse, a track in New Mexico, that an assistant starter has been suspended for 6 months for striking a filly in the starting gate 4 times in the head. And so, guys, we are under intense scrutiny, and this is not going to go away. And probably this is a very good thing, that people are paying attention now to really taking care of ensuring that these athletes are being treated well. Oh boy, and this doesn't go away. So I was at the Meadowlands Racetrack with Mr. Gural on March 6th, on Saturday, March 6th with Dr. McKeever. And on Monday, March 9th, we woke up to see this, that the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Southern District of New York charged 27 defendants in racehorse doping. And there were 4 indictments that allege systematic international scheme among trainers, veterinarians, and others to cheat using misbranded and adulterated drugs. Pictured here, so there were 2 New Jersey trainers in this indictment, both housed at Monmouth Park, Jorge Navarro and Jason Service. And here we have pictured a horse trained by Jorge Navarro is XY Jet. He won the Dubai Golden Shaheen race in Dubai, which was worth $2.5 million, and he subsequently died of a heart attack. This horse had been administered an agent called red acid, which had erythropoietin or epigen-like properties to increase red blood cell production, which of course then enables the horse to carry more oxygen, but it also can thicken the blood and make the horse prone to cardiac arrest. And so this horse did die. Pictured below is another person who was indicted in this indictment is Jason Service, also housed at stabled at Monmouth Park, pictured with last year's Kentucky Derby winner, Maximum Security. This horse and all of Jason Service's horses were giving a cocktail of growth factors called SGF 1000. These growth factors were used to enhance, speed up tissue repair and healing. We found out, or I found out at 9 o'clock this morning, that next week there will be the first discussion as to what is the status of this trial. The judge will hear this virtually, and then we'll begin a schedule of the actual trial. It also was shared today that the defendant's attorneys are trying to remove the wiretap and cell phone evidence, which has been used to indict these people. So we will see what happens, especially anything as it relates to the terms horse killing. So again, I hope that this moves quickly and that these people, and I'm sure there will be further people indicted as well. Interestingly, Maximum Security has not raced well since it left Jason Service's barn and has been under the tutelage of Bob Baffert. The horse did not race well in Saturday's Breeders' Cup Classic, and now has been announced that he has been retired to stud at Ashford Stud. Also interestingly is that Mr. Baffert, before the Breeders' Cup last week, went on record in the press to announce that he was hiring extra personnel to increase the security to make sure that after 30 positive tests during his career, he does not come up with a positive test again. All good stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Speaking of tests, pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals, I borrowed this slide from Dr. McKeever. There are a variety of things being used in horses, both illicitly as well as true medications. But what we need to make sure of is that research needs to be conducted to determine the effects that these agents have on horse health and performance. Everything from the baking soda used in milkshaking or an alkalinizing agent to the controversial right now, the ever controversial Lasix discussion, furosemide, clenbuterol used in ventopulmin cough syrup, and then the Epigen, which was used, recombinant erythropoietin, used, for instance, by Lance Armstrong illicitly when he was competing in his cycling. Something that I found at 2 o'clock this morning. Again, this is an ongoing saga, ladies and gentlemen, that Dr. Scott Palmer, many of you know, who used to own the New Jersey Equine Clinic here in New Jersey, is now the medical director of the New York Gaming Commission. He was meeting with the Mid-Atlantic Alliance, a group of racing interests in the Mid-Atlantic region, including New Jersey, yesterday. And of the 27 trainers that were indicted on March 9th, he looked at horses that had been under the care of those trainers. He sampled 200 standardbred horses and 100 thoroughbred horses. I did not find today the data on the standardbred horses, but of the 100 New York horses, 77% of those in a drug test came up positive for clenbuterol. Now, after also going through, which is protocol now in the New York Racing Association, the veterinary records that accompany those horses, none of those horses had in their records a prescription for clenbuterol to be used to treat what it's supposed to be used for, i.e. lower airway disease. And so Dr. Palmer right now is very concerned that these horses clenbuterol does have repartitioning effects, and it can increase muscle mass, muscle production in horses. And so these horses were being given clenbuterol not for the reason that it's supposed to be used for, but for other things as well. So again, as I mentioned, this is an ongoing saga. I borrowed this slide from Dr. George Malin. Dr. Malin is the head of the drug testing lab for New York State, and he presented this at the Association for Racing Commissioners International last year. And the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is there's no way our drug testing labs in horse racing are going to be able to keep up with the chemists who are coming up with this emerging and designer drug list. Look at all of the hundreds of new drugs that are out there. Again, a lot of money is going to have to be spent. If we're really going to get this under control, a lot of people are going to have to be hired. There's going to have to be a lot of out of competition testing around the country and also in the labs post racing. Okay, another slide I borrowed from Dr. McKeever. If we talk about the controversial furosemide or Lasix, we know it is a diuretic and a vasodilator. It was cleared for use in racehorses on race day before the research was done. While it is a treatment for exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, it reduces its severity, but not the incidence of EIPH. work by McKeever and his former PhD student, Dr. Ken Hinchcliffe, shows that it does enhance performance by causing a dramatic weight loss in urine excretion, and it also is an alkalinizing agent. The diuresis is blocked by the administration of bute, and the race day administration currently is only allowed in the United States, and the Jockey Club has said it will phase this out in 2020. Now, I found yesterday that there is a new coalition of tracks and industry groups to jointly fund a new LASIK study, which is being conducted by Waz Bailey at Washington State University, where 600 horses around the country in different racing jurisdictions will be scoped, and he will have 3 groups of horses. One group that will receive LASIKs 48 hours prior to the race or not at all, another group 24 hours prior to the race or not at all, and the last group where horses will be treated in the traditional manner that we use today is 4 hours prior to racing on race day. So again, work is continually being done, but I'm so pleased to see that some of these studies are being funded and that people are finally taking all of this seriously. Moving from drugs, enough of drugs, I'd like to talk about some procedures now. One being neurectomy, or where we actually block pain to an area of the horse by severing the nerve. And we have 2 types. One, the palmar digital nerve, is a lower neurectomy, usually used to alleviate foot pain, and was used a lot for horses with, and currently is with, navicular disease. Actually, we had on our Ask the Expert panel last Thursday night a person with a horse who is barely moving around, a 14-year-old standardbred who has a coffin joint problem, an arthritic problem, and I was wondering if this horse could be a candidate for a lower leg neurectomy to alleviate that foot pain. It's been used in racehorses for coffin, bone fractures, etc., and used successfully. We also have a higher neurectomy, a lateral plantar nerve, for instance, for the suspensory ligament. A concern I have about this, unlike the foot, when you have an orthopedic injury, you're not causing more, you're alleviating pain to make the horse serviceable again and comfortable again, but you're not increasing the damage to that tissue. In the case of something like a suspensory, a soft tissue injury, if the horse cannot feel pain, you will continue to aggravate that injury. And so now with our recent technology of the ability to use MRI, for instance, to confirm a diagnosis of a soft tissue injury versus a bone injury, we can decide whether that neurectomy is appropriate. But you certainly don't want to remove the sensation of pain in the case of a soft tissue injury where the horse will continue to damage that tissue. Neurectomy is banned by the Jockey Club in the United States. It is not banned by the United States Trotting Association. It is banned internationally by the Fédération Équestre Internationale, but not by the United States Equestrian Federation. And so when I was a kid and showing equitation and show jumpers and hunters and things, there were many show jumpers that had their feet denerved. And recently, again, it doesn't go away, ladies and gentlemen. Fabulous Trotter propulsion was sold from the United States to people in Sweden. Propulsion in 2020 of this year won the most prestigious race in Sweden, only to have an investigative reporter find that the horse had been denerved before sent to Sweden, where it is illegal to race a horse that has been denerved, and it also is illegal to stand as a stallion a horse that has been denerved. And so even though it was on its transfer papers And it was on its immigration papers that the horse had had this procedure done. Nobody seemed to pay any attention to it. And so on October 29th, the investigation was finished. And this horse has been disqualified from its 45 races. And the $2.9 million in purse monies that he won in the time he raced in Sweden will be redistributed. We also found out this week that the horse is going to be shipped back to the United States, and he will be standing at stud in New Jersey at Deo Valente Farm. Another procedure that we hear about is shockwave therapy. And I want to thank Dr. Tim Parkin from the University of Glasgow for the work that he has been really doing in looking at catastrophic injuries in thoroughbred racehorses. He found that the risk for fatal injury increases by 50 to 80% in horses that have had shockwave therapy treatment compared to horses that never have had shockwave therapy treatment. And of course, as you would imagine, this is closely related to horses being on the vet list, because why would you administer shockwave therapy if the horse didn't have some type of lameness issue? Further work by Dr. Parkin and his students in Argentina showed that when trainers were declared the use of phenylbutazone legally by with normal withdrawal times before the race, there was an increase of 45% for musculoskeletal injuries and 59% for a catastrophic fatal injury. So again, this masking of pain certainly does increase the risk of catastrophic injuries in our racehorses. So I've picked a lot on racehorses tonight, but I'm going to move to other disciplines as well. And so it's not only racing activities that are impacted, but non-racing activities are impacted as well. And the FEI banned in 2018 4 endurance horses, which tested positive for prohibited substances. And actually, ladies and gentlemen, the top ranked endurance horse in the world in 2018, Shaddad, came up positive for testosterone. And he was one of those horses who was banned. The FEI this year, very recently, in 2020, also has banned the United Arab Emirates from hosting any discipline events for the rest of 2020. And they also will be banned from competing in FEI endurance competitions through March 31st of 2021 because they held international competitions that were not using or following the rules and guidelines of FEI. So good for you, FEI, for cracking down on those horses. Eventing has also had its share of bad publicity, and since 2004, 38 riders and 91 horses have died cross-country. And I'll share with you later the positive things that eventing has done to improve the well-being of those human and equine athletes. And pictured here in 2009 at the United States Open Polo Championships, an entire team of polo ponies died on the field in front of thousands of fans. They were given a pre-match cocktail, which was to help them recover from the match. And it was compounded by a pharmacy in Florida. It included vitamin B, potassium, magnesium, and selenium. Unfortunately for them, the concentration of selenium was 10 times what it should have been in the drench that they received. And so all 21 of those ponies died on the field. The pharmacy realized its mistake immediately, and the next day in the press admitted their mistake. It's not going to bring those ponies back, ladies and gentlemen. And when I presented this in July, Andrew Kocher, a show jumper from the United States, was allegedly suspected of using shock spurs on his horses in competition. Well, as of October, a couple of weeks ago, 28th of 2020, he now has been suspended by the FEI. That he held in his hand a device which sent through a wire through his jacket, his breeches, to his spurs, shocks to those horses. I'll tell you what, guys, if I was a horse, I sure as hell wouldn't jump a fence if I was shocked approaching the fence each time. I would dump your butt right down on the ground. Okay, we also have issues of there are so many governing bodies. There's not one governing force. And I realize that that's very difficult to do, but we can start with the American Association of Equine Practitioners. Their sole purpose is to ensure the well-being of horses. And so I applaud AAEP for all of the work that they do. We also, for racehorses, have an Association of Racing Commissioners International. And all well and good, it's a group represented by every state, every racing commission in the United States that has horse racing. There is this body, but there is no unified voice. There is no unified withholding times. There is no unified drug rules. There is no unified whipping rules. And so even though there's a national organization, each individual jurisdiction has different rules of its own. And so if you, as a driver myself, when I go to different states to race, every rate you have to apply for there's no general license that you can have a license in all states. With our electronic systems now and our computer databases, you would think that you would be able to do this once, but no. So this is a problem. Even though their intentions are all well and good, but if you're racing horses in different jurisdictions, it's easy for you to make a mistake because the rules change between jurisdictions. And then we have the RMTC, the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. It's made up of 23 racing interest groups. Its mission is to promote uniform rules and testing standards. And that's all I'm going to say about the RMTC. I'm sure Dr. McKeever is smiling at me right now. Federation Equestre Internationale is the governing body for international competitions. The United States Equestrian Federation is the governing body for competitions that are in the United States that aren't international. And then we also have the World Anti-Doping Agency, whose code of ethics is the document that harmonizes anti-doping policies in all sports and countries. So we do have a lot of agencies that are attempting to support equestrian sports, including horse racing. Now, in view of time this evening, I'm not going to go through these, but I would suggest that anyone who is interested, the AAEP does have a list of their principles of equine welfare, and this is on their website. It's very easy to find if you just go to AAEP. And I thank them for these, have been updated in 2016. In 2008, when we started to first see some of the catastrophic injuries in thoroughbred racing, especially, the AEP went on, took a proactive approach and produced a white paper titled Putting the Horse First, Veterinary Recommendations for the Safety and Welfare of the Thoroughbred Racehorse. And the general principles are as follows: the adoption of uniform rules of medication usage, testing, security, and enforcement by all industry participants. It's a dream, guys, but we're moving forward to getting there. There needs to be increased funding for regulatory functions, including state-of-the-art testing and racetrack security. And there also needs to be continued identification and implementation of procedures and strategies that will significantly reduce the injury rate of horses. An ongoing process. The FEI also has a nice code of conduct for the welfare of the horse. And again, you can go, this was updated in 2013. You can go to the FEI's website to look at these in detail for yourselves. But the general categories are general welfare, the fitness for the horse to compete, events must not prejudice horse welfare, and also the need for humane treatment of horses at all times. Moving back to racing, there are reasons for catastrophic breakdowns. Most fatal injuries are due to a pre-existing condition and the use of drugs which mask pain. Another leading reason is purse subsidies from government and casino taxes exploit horses. Many times the purse that is offered for a race is greater than the horse's value. And so the horse is raced more often than it should be without inadequate rest in between those races. So for instance, within the last 10 years, I was, after a meeting in Harrisburg, spent the evening at Penn National outside of Harrisburg at the racetrack and was watching a race, and it was a $5,000 claiming race. And Dr. Page has some wonderful data that he's going to show you later about claiming horses. The tag on the horse was $5,000, which is not an expensive horse. The purse was 5 times more, was $25,000. And I thought, oh my God, how could you be running a $5,000 claimer for $25,000? But they were. And Penn National went for a period of time there, a time when they did have a high incidence of catastrophic injuries. And so some of the things that are changing in the New York Racing Association, the California Horse Racing Board, and all over the country is that this ratio of the value of the horse, i.e. the claiming tag, and the purse has got to be very similar. And unfortunately, for those of us who care and are in the research game of looking at the well-being of horses, money from these bloated purse structures is not used for research to improve safety. Up until recently, people are starting to get in the game. And there has been a movement to increase pre-race vet inspections, to improve security, and to increase drug testing. And we look at some of Dr. Parkin's data has shown that pre-race vet inspections, not only just jogging out the horse and looking at front limb lameness, they're actually taking it further to really focus also on hind limb lameness and taking it a step further to actually do the check of the heart, looking at things like AFib, etc. So what has been done to improve the reduction of catastrophic injuries in racehorses? So the House of Representatives in the United States in September passed H.R. 1754, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. It's going to be followed by an introduction soon by Senator McConnell. Both Andy Barr from the House of Representatives and Senator McConnell are from Kentucky, and they are sponsoring this Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. This purpose is to improve the integrity and safety of horse racing by requiring a uniform anti-doping and medications control program to be developed and enforced by an independent horse racing anti-doping and medication authority. September of 2020. After those fatalities at Aqueduct, there was a wonderful New York task force on racehorse health and safety led by Dr. Scott Palmer. And this report is available, ladies and gentlemen, for you to see. And also following suit after what we saw at Santa Anita, the California Horse Racing Board also has a report. And in view of time, I would recommend that you go and see those yourself. We're not going to go through those this evening. Santa Anita, and following in its path is also the New York Racing Association at Belmont's Ruffian Center, and Churchill Downs also has an open check to improve their veterinary facilities using things such as uh, CAT scans, PET scans. This is in concert right at Santa Anita Park itself, but also in concert with the University of California's at Davis Veterinary School. All of these horses that have a fatal injury are necropsied, and they need to be to find out what actually the cause of death was. Now, the good news is in the Santa Anita meet, beginning the fall of 2019 and through what they could race this year in 2020, there was not one fatality during a race or in training at Santa Anita Park. Excellent news. Kudos to the Jockey Club. Began in 2009 an equine injury database, the first of its kind, to actually look at racing injuries. It seeks to identify the frequency, types, outcome of racing injuries using a standardized format that generates valid statistics. And Dr. Parkin is in charge of gathering and reporting those statistics. This is an initiative led by Dr. Mary Scolay and Dr. Tim Parkin. And they're also identifying markers for horses at an increased risk of injury and serves as a data source for research directed at improving safety and preventing injuries. Since 2009, the fatalities are down 23%. Good news. And Dr. Parkin also has shared this from the data that he has collected in the last 10 years. Known risk factors for fatal injury, again, include a previous injury, having been on the vet list, the first start as an older horse. So this is not only an increased risk of breakdown in a first start, there is also an increased risk for this horse for all of its career starts. So again, if we talk about remodeling of bone, people say, oh, you shouldn't be exercising and putting stress on a young thoroughbred horse's bones at age 2 and 3. This is not the case. If you're starting a horse later in its life and it has not had that stress and the ability to stress that bone to make it stronger, there's an increased risk of breakdown as a starter, as an older horse, a first-time starter. And in the view of claimers, if we change the trainer and time with the trainer, there is an increased risk of breakdown. So the first start with a new trainer, there's an increase of 28% of a fatal injury, and this lasts for about 30 days post transition to the new trainer. And while we have, based on the Jockey Club's database data, there is a decrease in fatalities on the dirt is down 24%, turf is down 20%, and synthetic surfaces breakdowns are down 37%. We still know from this data that synthetic surfaces are the safest, followed by turf, and followed by dirt. This I found in my preparation and research for this talk in July, and this is a wonderful resource, ladies and gentlemen. I encourage you all to go to it. The Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation has held for about a decade now annual welfare and safety of the racehorse summits. This year it was virtual, but all of the summits are archived. You have the actual video recording of all of the presentations, as well as access to the PowerPoints. So I encourage you all to go to the Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation and look at these welfare and safety of the racehorse summits. They are wonderful. And the gamut from racing surfaces to a description by Dr. Parkin of the database to all types of topics. People from Santa Anita at the vet school telling what they're doing now to ensure racehorse safety. So please feel free to go and look at those. It is a wonderful source of information. We do have updated guidelines for horse welfare and safety penalties. USEF annually puts out its drugs and medications guidelines, and there are also guidelines for penalties from the United States Equestrian Federation. Eventing is moving forward in its quest for a safer sport. We know that cross country, the jumps are pretty formidable. They're very solid, and a lot of these injuries have taken place cross country, but now they're coming up with what we call frangible technology, where the cross country jumps are being constructed with deformable devices that allow part or all of the solid obstacle to collapse, and thus decreasing the risk of horse falls and particularly rotational falls, which are fatal to both horses and humans. And a neat new system that's used in Europe, and I know it is coming to the United States soon, a company called EquiRatings. There is an equine EquiRatings quality index system which tracks cross-country outcomes with unique formulas designed to provide a risk rating for every horse at every level. And so you cannot, a horse rider or a horse rider combination cannot move up and compete at the next level until it is approved by this quality index system, which is a good safety measure. And I applaud those efforts. I'm going to close and just shout out our next speaker is a wonderful colleague, Dr. Alan Page, and he was so kind, and my colleagues at the Gluck Equine Research Center. You know, we talk about everybody being competitive and people not supporting each other. I have never had anything but positive support from Dr. Horhoff, Dr. Adams, Dr. Page, and everyone at the University of Kentucky's Gluck Equine Research Center. And so Dr. Page is going to be able to share. He gave to me for my talk in Brazil several slides to use sharing his data, but I thought don't want to do that tonight. I want you to get it from the horse's mouth. And so Dr. Page in a few moments is going to give you his presentation. I want to end with the fact that these wonderful athletes deserve a home for life. And you know, when we look at most of our non-racing competition horses, many of these horses do have a home for life because the owners really, it's not totally a business. The owners use these horses and compete them themselves. But when we look at our racehorses, many of them, they want a second chance. They want a second job. Horses all want a job. And so moving forward, we do have several organizations to rehome, retrain, and replace these horses. And so the Standardbred Retirement Foundation, New Vocations, Second Chance Thoroughbreds. And as a kid, I rode many off-the-track thoroughbreds before off-the-track thoroughbreds was a term that you recognized, and showed them in hunters and equitation classes and stuff. These horses make great horses doing other things. So with that, Ms. Weinert, I'm turning it back to you. And maybe we have a chance for a question or two. If not, whatever, you take it away, kiddo.
Thank you, Dr. Malinowski. If there are any questions, you can go ahead and enter them in the chat. Otherwise, we are going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Alan Page, who will present on his work investigating the use of blood tests to predict catastrophic injury in horses. Dr. Page holds a scientist veterinarian position at the University of Kentucky's Gluck Equine Research Center, from which he obtained his PhD in 2013. Prior to this, he received his DVM from the University of California, Davis in 2008 and completed an internship at the Hagyard Equine Medical Institute in 2009. His primary research focus is on the inflammatory responses to exercise and injury in equine athletes across a variety of disciplines, and includes determining whether messenger RNA or mRNA expression can be used to predict impending injury in racehorses. He also has an interest in developing diagnostics for various infectious diseases based on mRNA expression analysis and/or serum antibody detection. Dr. Page's work has previously included research on Lawsonia intracellaris, a bacterial disease of young horses and the cause of equine proliferative enteropathy, as well as Rhodococcus equi in foals. His lecture this evening is titled, "Can we use a blood test to predict catastrophic racing injuries in horses?" Welcome, Dr. Page.
Great, Jennifer, thank you so much. Let me get this going here. Hopefully somebody will holler at me if you can't see that. But Jennifer, thanks very much. And Dr. Malinowski, thank you also for those kind words. I think there is certainly enough work to go around for everybody. And so we certainly enjoy collaborating with people across the country and certainly with the group at Rutgers. So when coming up with a title for this talk this evening, I wanted to come up with something that was catchy and would get people's attention. And so came up with, can we use a blood test to predict catastrophic racing injuries in horses? And I will certainly get to that here in a minute, but just kind of an overview of what I want to talk about. First off, I'm going to talk about gene expression analysis. This is primarily what we do in our lab at the Gluck Center. And then talk about what we know with regards to the inflammatory response to exercise, particularly in horses. And then finish up with two projects. The first one that was published late last year, which was entitled Comparison of Pre-Race Inflammatory Marker mRNA Expression with Race-Related Parameters in Thoroughbreds. And I promise you the data is a lot more exciting than that title. And then I'll hit on kind of what we're excited to finally be able to share. This is one of the first times we're rolling out this data, and that's the expression of select mRNA in thoroughbreds with catastrophic racing injuries. And then just to wrap things up, I'll talk real briefly about our future research directions and where we go from here. So gene expression analysis relies on measuring differences in whole blood messenger RNA or mRNA markers. We use commercially available specialized tubes that are designed for stabilizing messenger RNA. They're called Tempest tubes. And so we're able to piggyback onto that commercially available platform. But some of you may remember from biology classes, DNA is transcribed into messenger RNA, and then it's subsequently translated by ribosomes into proteins, which you see here down at the bottom as a polypeptide. A lot of what is done, especially in horses, but other species as well, is quantifying those proteins. For a couple reasons that I'll go through, we've opted to go upstream of that and really look at messenger RNA. And one of the first reasons we've done that is the fact quantitative PCR or polymerase chain reaction analysis that we use is highly sensitive and specific for the targets that we want to analyze. So in other words, we know that what we want to measure is in fact what we are measuring. The other likely just as important point is that horses are not a high priority target for the companies that develop protein quantification reagents. And so as a result, we're really limited in the number of different proteins that we can actually measure in horses. We don't have that restriction, however, when we use gene expression analysis and PCR. So gene expression analysis, when we talk about inflammation, we've actually done a study, did this last year, in which we elicited a localized inflammatory response in the form of a synovitis in horses by injecting lipopolysaccharide or LPS, which is a component of bacterial cell walls. This was actually from an E. coli. And what we did is we injected it into a single joint in these horses, and then we measured the inflammatory gene response over time. And what we see is something like interleukin-1 beta, which is a pro-inflammatory marker, and IL-10, which is anti-inflammatory. We see that they both show a fairly similar time frame in that while we have increases in expression at 4 and 9 hours, we have to wait until 6 hours to have a significant increase. And we see the same thing here with IL-10. So that's really was interesting to us. We've always had this feeling, but we're able to finally prove that with a localized substantial inflammatory response, you can in fact measure changes in circulating whole blood. It just takes multiple hours to get to that point. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here. also that was really important in this project is we actually showed that measuring messenger RNA was actually a lot more sensitive than measuring circulating cytokine concentrations. Using one of the commercially available kits, we really weren't able to even detect interleukin-1 beta and IL-10 in horses. And so that was a bit disappointing, but it really suggested that we're onto something looking at messenger RNA. When we can look at certain proteins like serum amyloid A, which is referred to as an acute phase protein, so it increases fairly quickly in the face of acute inflammation. What we see is that we don't get an increase in SAA until 9 hours, but it doesn't actually plateau until that 48 to 72 hour mark. So again, we're having our messenger RNA changes are really preceding what we can measure as far as circulating proteins. So talking now about the inflammatory response to exercise, we know from some work that actually came out of Rutgers that we do get increased mRNA expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines following treadmill exercise in horses. A lot of work has actually been done in humans to show that you get a very similar response post-exercise. And what we see here with these horses that ran on the treadmill was that we get a significant increase in interleukin-1 at 2 and 6 hours post-exercise, but it takes 6 hours for another pro-inflammatory marker, TNF, tumor necrosis factor alpha, to increase. And so that was kind of interesting. And again, I'll talk about that in the context of our breakdown work here in a minute. Exercise-induced inflammation is really the result of exercise-induced tissue damage. It can be due to mechanical damage. It can also be due to lactic acid and free radical accumulation within the tissues. Regardless of the type, what happens is you get a release of damage-associated molecular patterns, or DAMPs. And these DAMPs work via a variety of different pathways, some of which are seen here, but they all ultimately result in the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And that's where we get our post-exercise inflammation. This inflammation is, however, associated with a normal adaptation exercise, and in fact is really important for muscle and skeletal repair processes to take place in athletes. Talking now about exercise adaptation or conditioning, we see as two different things that occurs. One is a decrease in the inflammatory response. We see over time, we see a decrease in inflammation, but we also see a post-exercise decrease in inflammation. And in fact, you can actually get the induction of what's been termed the anti-inflammatory state, where you actually get increased production of anti-inflammatory cytokines. And that's one of the reasons that oftentimes doctors will recommend that people with chronic inflammatory conditions exercise more, is to really try to increase their production of anti-inflammatory cytokines. So for this graph that I'm going to show you, it represents our messenger RNA as an inflammation score. And that inflammation score is actually an average of multiple different pro-inflammatory markers that we've simply averaged together to give us one score to make our data a little bit easier to look at. So what we had is we looked at two different groups of horses. Both were 2-year-old thoroughbreds just beginning their high speed or breezing training. And group A was a group that trained and breezed twice a week over a synthetic track, while group B trained once a week over a turf track. And so what we see is early on in this training, they are fairly similar. But as we expand that out to 8 weeks, so as they've had multiple weeks of breezing, what we see is group B, with the exception of week 7, demonstrates what we would expect to see in a normal adaptation exercise. They are having a decrease in their inflammatory response over time, thanks in large part, primarily actually due to their training. Whereas group A, which again trained twice a week, actually had increases in their inflammation, which was really surprising to us and really suggested to us that these horses may actually be overtraining. This data was, I believe, collected actually in 2013. And really over the last 5 to 10 years or so, breezing young horses twice a week has really fallen out of favor with trainers, because those horses were really thought to have a higher incidence of injury and higher incidence of bucked shins, which is also known as dorsometacarpal disease, that would result in them needing to take some time off from their training. So certainly kind of this data backs that up. And that really led us to make the comment that while some inflammation is necessary for tissue healing and repair, exaggerated inflammatory responses could actually be associated with injuries. Before we get to the injuries, though, I did want to talk about our first paper, which was looking at pre-race inflammatory marker expression and comparing and looking at that in relation to race-related parameters. So for this project, we took a single Tempest tube was collected from the study horses, and that was done over a 60-day period from a single Kentucky racetrack. Samples were collected for us by the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission during regulatory pre-race total CO2 testing. And so that included 1 to 2 random races per day that were sampled, as well as all graded stakes races. And in total, we had an even 500 samples that were collected for this project. We isolated our RNA and performed PCR and measured interleukin-1 beta, again, pro-inflammatory. Interleukin-6, which is an interesting interleukin in that it can have both pro and anti-inflammatory actions. It depends on the tissue that we're talking about of tissue of origin. We believe, based on the data that we've seen in horses, that in our whole blood, IL-6 is probably a pro-inflammatory marker. IL-8, IL-17A, and tumor necrosis factor alpha are also pro-inflammatory. We then collected a variety of data from publicly available records via searching Equibase. And then under a license from the Jockey Club Information Systems, we obtained data regarding the number of starts and the average and the number of days between starts for multiple different groups. For our statistics, we used an analysis of variance, or ANOVA, on ranks, and our significance was set to a p-value of less than 0.05. I'll take a second to kind of orient you. Over here on the y-axis is our relative quantities, which is a unit that we use to that allows us to compare horse to horse and across time. So that represents our expression. And what you'll see on each of the following graphs is you'll see 6 different lines. The first 5 represent the individual messenger RNA markers that are represented here. And then the black line, the black bar, will represent an average of all 5 of those together. So for this first graph, we looked at race categories. So did these horses, were they entered into an allowance race, a claiming race, or a stakes race? And what we see is those horses that were entered into stakes races had significantly lower expression of IL-1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and the average of all 5 markers together when compared to claiming and allowance race horses. And there were no differences between these 2 groups of horses. Next thing we wanted to look at was, did the post-time favorite, as determined by its the post-time odds, finish in the top 3? So no, the favorite did not finish in the top 3, or yes, they did finish in the top 3. And what we see here is that IL-6 expression was significantly lower than in the horses that did finish in the top 3 compared to those that finished outside of the top 3 and were the favorite. We looked at a variety of other parameters in this project and found that there were no significant differences with respect to age or sex, or whether they were the favorite by their post-time odds. And then we were really hopeful that we had an inside track to an early retirement, and wanted to see if we could predict the top 3 finishers or the race winners. And it didn't work. We're still working and haven't retired, unfortunately. So hopeful, but didn't happen. One of the things we wanted to look at to hopefully try to better understand and explain our data was look at things like the average number of starts. And so we looked at the average number of starts where 50% or more of the starts for horses were either in a claiming race, an allowance race, or a graded stakes race. And then we looked at that across North America for the entire year, encompassing our study, or just horses that raced at least one time within Kentucky in that same year. What we found is that claiming horses, horses that raced the majority of their time in claiming races, had a higher number of average starts compared to the other 2. Interestingly, there really wasn't a big difference in the North American average between allowance races and graded stakes races. And we see the same thing here with horses that raced in Kentucky, although they actually raced essentially one time more per year. And actually graded stakes race horses had a slightly higher average than allowance horses. The other thing we wanted to look at was the average interval in days between starts. And again, not surprisingly, claiming horses during this year had the shortest interval between races, followed by allowance racehorses, and then, not surprisingly, graded stakes racehorses had the largest time period between starts. So as Dr. Malinowski kind of hit on earlier, a lot of interest has been paid towards claiming horses, especially ones that have drop-in classes and potentially ones at the lower end of the claiming tag range. And so we looked at horses that were up for a claiming tag of less than $10,000, $10,000 to $25,000, more than $25,000, and then those, the large number of horses we also had that were not in a claiming race. And what we found was horses that were in the more than $25,000 claiming tag group had significantly elevated expression, again, of IL-1 beta, TNF alpha, and our 5-marker average compared to those horses that were not up for a claiming tag. But it also surprisingly also included these horses that were less than $10,000. And I still, to this day, do not know why that is the case. But as far as this group, one of our theories is that they're kind of on that cusp between claiming races and allowance races, and maybe they're being pushed a little bit harder, or these could also be allowance race horses that had to drop in class and drop to the upper levels of claiming races, and therefore we're getting pushed a little bit harder to try and maintain that or get back up to the allowance level. So as Dr. Malinowski mentioned about maximum security, Breeders' Cup was actually here at Keeneland this past weekend, and I was fortunate enough to get to go and got to take some pictures. And so this just was an up-close picture of Gamine. This mare subsequently won the Breeders' Cup mare and filly sprint and set a track record in doing so. So it was a very good race. So conclusions from this first study, we found that pre-race inflammatory gene expression is not associated with performance in a given race, with the caveat that there was lower IL-6 production in the post-time favorites that finished in the top 3 as opposed to outside of the top 3. Inflammatory gene expression does, however, appear to be associated with the ability or caliber of racehorses, as we saw with our graded stakes racehorses. And some of the data supports the industry's focus on claiming horses and their increased risk for injury, as we saw with that those horses racing for a higher price claiming tag. Switching gears entirely now to racehorse injuries. As was mentioned earlier, since 2009, the Jockey Club has maintained their equine injury database. Let me just see here. Has maintained their equine injury database. And since 2009, in 2009, I should say, the average number of fatalities per 1,000 starts, which is how they classify it, was 2%. I'm sorry, was 2 horses per 1,000 starts. And what we see is since 2009, there's been a fairly steady decline, but really since 2015, we've reached almost this trough where we're around 1.5 to 1.7 fatalities per 1,000 starts. And while that is a relatively rare number, as was shown, and as we know, if you've paid attention to the lay media in the last couple of years, these fatalities garner a lot of media attention. And even at a 1.5 fatalities per 1,000 starts, there's still a lot of room for improvement. One of the things that always gets me a little miffed is when you hear somebody kind of blow off one of these breakdowns as, the horse just took a bad step. And that has really been debunked at this point. Upwards of 90% or more of horses that break down have a pre-existing musculoskeletal condition. A lot of the horses in our study had pre-existing pathology that was in the area of their fracture, or sometimes you'll have pre-existing damage in the opposite limb that suggests that maybe they're overloading the limb that subsequently breaks down. Because of that underlying pathology, there's been the thought that it may stimulate the production of specific biomarkers or proteins, or even potentially a non-specific inflammatory response. Now, protein biomarkers have been explored by others with really just only some limited success as far as injury detection. Interestingly, nobody to date has explored mRNA expression as a biomarker for injuries, which leads us to this study. But this was at the end of the Breeders' Cup Classic. This is authentic. He was also the Kentucky Derby winner this year. He has been retired. You know, you win a couple big races and you're retired, and he's actually going to stand for, as an unproven sire, stand for $75,000 here in Central Kentucky. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. The second project, entitled Expression of Select mRNA in Thoroughbreds with Catastrophic Racing Injuries. Our hypothesis was that, if I can get it up here, thoroughbred racehorses that experience a catastrophic or fatal injury while racing will have evidence of increased inflammation when compared to non-injured controls. Like our first study, blood samples were collected in Tempest blood RNA tubes, and we collected them from several. They were collected from several different groups. The first group was our catastrophically injured, or CI horses, and they were sampled immediately post-injury. On here, it's listed as being less than 30 minutes, but I can tell you most of them were in the 5 to 15-minute range. And while, and that was why I showed you some of that data earlier about our localized inflammatory model and the time frame that it takes to see changes. Even though they are terrible and they are in fact catastrophic, fractures are still really just a focal source of inflammation, and so we're really confident that the time frame that we had for collection of these samples, we would not get changes in our inflammatory mRNA expression based solely on the injury that has occurred. We also collected matched post-race controls within 45 minutes of the end of a race. And by matched, I mean they were horses that ran in the same race as a catastrophically injured horse. They were subsequently sent to the drug testing barn, and we had samples pulled when drug testing samples were also pulled. Random pre-race controls were also pulled for us, and that was done during pre-race total CO2 testing. And then a small subset of horses were actually sampled both pre and post race to evaluate any racing effects or exercise effects essentially on our expression. Our goal was to enroll 150 catastrophically injured horses, 300 of our matched post-race controls, and about 700 pre-race controls to really just serve as our general racing population controls. We performed mRNA analysis. We've gone from 5 markers now to 21 different genes, and I'm not going to talk about each one individually, other than to say that they were selected based on their known roles in inflammation, bone repair and remodeling, tissue repair, and or their response to injury. This was a massive study with a lot of statistics, so we got smart and we phoned a friend and who told us to run a paired t-test to examine pre and post-racing changes to look at those. We also used multiple logistic regression analysis to analyze differences in expression between injured and non-injured horses. And then for those that we identified as being important, we used receiver operating characteristic analysis to calculate our sensitivity and specificity, which is very important to know for a potential diagnostic test. I mentioned this was a long project. It was 2.5 years, and it spanned from September of 2017 to May of this year. In total, we had 4 state jurisdictions that participated, as well as 1 individual racetrack. We collected 904 total samples. That included 107 with catastrophic injuries that met our inclusion criteria, 205 matched post-race control samples, 374 pre-race control samples, and then we excluded 218 samples. Those included catastrophically injured horses where maybe it was an unusual fracture and we didn't feel comfortable, including it in our study population. It also included catastrophically injured horses that were noted in the race narrative to have clipped heels with, been bumped by, or fallen over another horse, and included non-fatally injured horses that were sampled for fear that it was a fatal injury. It also included horses that died acutely during or after the race, but by and large, our largest number of excluded samples came from control samples. We thought it was really important to control any potential effects of our control horses that may have been injured and had to take time off from racing, but it wouldn't have been known to us. And so any of our control horses that didn't race within a certain amount of time were excluded because of that concern that they may have had an injury that would have biased our data. So the first thing to talk about is the racing effect inflammation. So again, we used paired pre-race and post-race samples from the same horses to evaluate the effect of racing on our mRNA markers. And unfortunately, of our, going into this, we really didn't think we would see much of a difference. But of our 21 markers, we actually had to eliminate over half of them. We had to eliminate 12 because they did change in that short post-race period. As I mentioned, surprising to us because we know, at least from localized inflammation, it takes hours to get changes. And again, from the data from Rutgers, we know it should at least take 2 hours from an exercising standpoint. But again, that exercise was on a treadmill that wasn't really race, include all of the stress and the warm up and really the incredible intensity that we get with racing. And so the more we thought about it, the more we realized that this probably makes sense. Have a lot of inflammation in these horses originating from multiple different organs or systems, including the GI tract, the respiratory tract, and muscle has a lot of inflammation. And since we are measuring messenger RNA in whole blood, it's primarily coming from white blood cells that are circulating through all of these different systems. Instead of just past one local source of inflammation like we see here, it's passing through all of these different systems. Those white blood cells become activated and begin producing more messenger RNA that we measure. And so ultimately, it probably makes sense that you do get some pretty quick changes in some of these markers. However, all is not lost because of our remaining 9 markers, 3 of them show promise with regards to identifying horses at risk for catastrophic injury. And I will show you those right now. The first one is insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1. IGF-1 is a growth hormone, and the expression of IGF-1 increased in our catastrophically injured horses. IGF-1 is known to play a role in both bone development and repair. And what's really interesting is that same data where I've showed you IL-1 and IL-10 that increase at 6 hours, that same study, we found that IGF-1 actually decreases in the first 24 hours of inflammation before it subsequently increases. And that really suggests to us that IGF-1 expression, if we're going to use it for something like breakdowns, may actually be indicative of chronic inflammatory process that's going on in these horses, likely in either connective tissue or in bone. Second marker was matrix metalloproteinase 2, or MMP2. It also increased in our catastrophically injured horses, and it is also important for tissue repair as well, and it plays also an important role in fracture remodeling. Last marker of interest was interleukin-1 receptor antagonist, which is also known as IRAP. Some of you may recognize IRAP as a treatment modality that is available to horses, primarily those with joint disease. And that's because IRAP is a potent anti-inflammatory. And because of that, interestingly, it was actually decreased. IRAP expression was actually decreased in our catastrophically injured horses, again suggesting that these horses have chronic inflammation because of that lack of anti-inflammatory production. What was also interesting, if we flip the script here, those horses with elevated IRAP expression were actually 7 times less likely to be catastrophically injured in our project. Finally, we see a graph that kind of brings all this together. So this is all 3 of our markers combined. And what we see over here on the left is our horses that were not injured, and on the right is the horses that were injured. And obviously, there are outliers in each group. We would expect that. Just because these horses are high and they didn't have a breakdown doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't at risk. But we see a pretty clear difference between these 2 groups. The next thing we look at is our receiver operating characteristic curve. Those of you not familiar with looking at them, your perfect test would go straight up here on this blue line and straight across on the blue line to meet over here. That is your ideal perfect test. Whereas if you were to flip a coin and have a 50-50 chance of getting it right, you would have this dotted line. So obviously, the closer we get up here to the blue line, the better. And this is what our curve looked like. We calculated our sensitivity. We found that to be 76%. So in other words, we had a 24% false negative rate, or unfortunately, 24% of the time we would have said a horse is not at risk for an injury when in fact they were. We obviously want to minimize that as much as possible. We don't want to miss these horses. And I'll talk about some ways we may be able to address that. Specificity was 88%, or in other words, we had a false positive rate of 12%. So 12% of the time, we would have said a horse is at risk for a catastrophic injury when in fact they were not. Now, we can adjust our cutoff with all three of these markers and increase our sensitivity and decrease our false negative rate, but that comes at the cost of having an increasing false positive rate. Nevertheless, one of the things people often talk about is the area under the curve for this graph, the ROC graph, and we found that to be 0.88 with a perfect being 0.1, or what it roughly equates to saying that these three markers as a test have an accuracy of approximately 88%. And so while yes, we miss some catastrophically injured horses, I would certainly argue that an accuracy of around 88% is a lot better than we have right now with regards to identifying horses at risk for breakdown. There were some limitations to this project. We weren't collecting these pre-race. And so while we very strongly believe that we've taken into account any racing effects on our expression, and we are not concerned about the effect that injuries might have had during that post-injury period, it would be better to collect all of these samples pre-race to eliminate any of those. Plus, we'd be able to look at those markers that we actually had to exclude. The other question we get a lot, what effect pre-race medications could have had on the expression? And unfortunately, at this point, we don't know. I do want to point out, however, that this was designed to be a field study, and we know that 90+% of horses will race on allowable doses of pre-race medications. And so just because we didn't keep track of that, most of them were on it, and quite frankly, when the majority of your population's on it, it's one of those things that could bias your data, but you can also kind of discount it as not really having that much of an effect. When we talk about potential applications, we see this as potentially another tool in the kit for regulators for removing horses from a vet's list. Right now, it often involves an exam, drug testing, and these horses have to be observed to breeze by the regulatory veterinarians, but this is potentially another use. We also see this as a pre-race screening tool, collected 3 to 5 days or so prior to a race to give us enough time to turn them around. But we see it as really being useful as a high throughput way to screen horses and potentially identify those horses that should be examined further by x-rays or by a closer exam by the regulatory veterinarians, or with this increasing interest in advanced imaging, things like CT, MRI, and PET scanning that don't have the ability to take horses in a high throughput situation. This may cut down on the number of horses that need to go through those scans. Also, I want to point out, doing pre-race screening, you would get serial samples from horses. It may be a month apart or something like that, but that serial sampling, we strongly believe would actually increase our sensitivity and specificity because we'd be able to identify trends within individual horses as far as their expression changes and identify things that are concerning before they were to break down. So to conclude, multiple genes undergo significant expression changes within 45 minutes post-race. And the mRNA expression of IGF-1, IRAP, and MMP2 may provide an economical, effective, and non-invasive means of detecting horses at risk for catastrophic injury. Because I can't let this one go, this was Monomoy Girl. This was in the Breeders' Cup Distaff on Saturday. She was mid-pack here going into the first turn, subsequently won. The next day, she sold at public auction for $9.5 million, which is just incredible for a mare, and much to the credit of the people who purchased her. They've opted to, as long as everything goes okay, to race her next year as a 6-year-old. So very interesting to see where her career goes. So finishing up talking about our future directions, we are right now beginning a project using RNA sequencing of our catastrophic injury samples and the controls to identify additional markers of interest. To put it into context, as I mentioned, we looked at 21 markers in our project that we just finished up. Using RNA sequencing, it's predicted that we'll be able to look at 21,000 markers. And so we have very high hopes and expectations that we'll be able to add additional markers to our panel and also further increase our sensitivity and specificity. As I mentioned, we don't really know the effect of pre-race medications on gene expression, so we're hoping and just getting started on a project doing that. And then we've also proposed and put in for funding a study collecting 10,000 pre-race samples to validate the findings from this study. unfortunately, you need a huge number of samples, and that becomes very logistically difficult because 10,000 samples represents 10,000 starts, and based on the current numbers, you'd expect 15 or so catastrophic injuries, of which we would hope 10 would meet our inclusion criteria. And that would really just be to demonstrate that our 3 markers do in fact hold up. So that is it. I will finish up there, but I do want to recognize my collaborators, but who are listed here. But I really want to just draw attention to the commission veterinarians and the technical staff who aren't listed here, who really handled the day-to-day operations and sample collection for this project. And also want to recognize the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission's Equine Drug Research Council, who funded both of the projects that I've discussed in their entirety. So with that, I will wrap things up, but I will happily, Jennifer, take any questions that there might be. If I can do this without killing off PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Page, for that great presentation. Just a quick note for all of our participants, I want to draw your attention to the chat. Kyle has put into the chat some links that you can use to check out the work that Dr. Page has been conducting at the Gluck Equine Research Center. So please go ahead and use that link. We did have, Dr. Page, 2 questions that came in, both referencing age of these horses. And so the first question was from Maggie Romano, and she was interested in if the age made a difference. And I believe she was referring to that second study. And then we also had an age question from Ellen, who wanted to know what the age range of horses in the first study was, and if you thought having a larger age range, you would potentially have seen a relationship between mRNA expression and age.
So for our catastrophic injury project, we did not see an association of age with any of our markers. Interestingly, it's been suggested through Dr. Parkin's work with the Equine Injury Database that older horses tend to be more at risk for catastrophic injuries, but I believe it was around 75% of our CI horses in our project were actually between the ages of 2 and 4. So that was pretty interesting in and of itself, but we did have multiple horses, I think up to age 9. But, you know, as with thoroughbred racing, the older you get, the fewer horses you have, and it really becomes almost a survivor effect, where these horses have been around for a while, they've been campaigning forever, and they are really tough. And so it doesn't surprise me that we didn't really see an age effect. As far as the first study, those were just 2-year-olds. Those were 2-year-olds early in their training. They had been galloping, and then where we started to watch them was about a week before they began their high-speed breeze training. So we haven't looked at training in older horses, because once you get beyond that initial move from galloping and hacking around to breezing, they all go different directions, because you have trainers do different things, and it becomes pretty much impossible to control. And so by picking a standard time point, we're able to kind of look at them in a more controlled fashion. So hopefully that answers that.
Jennifer, if I may interject, Dr. Page, thanks
Yep.
for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I enjoyed
You are
it
welcome.
very, very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Page.
Yep, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Next, we will be moving on to our awards portion of the night. But first, we would like to invite a special guest to make a presentation to the Equine Science Center on behalf of the 4-H Horse Project Advisory Committee. Please welcome Ms. Stella Almeida.
Well, I can see myself here. Let me see if I can find my video. Thank you very much. What a great program we had tonight. I really learned an awful lot, and all of the facts are interesting. Tonight I'm representing the 4-H Association basically our state horse show. We had a virtual show this year. I am going to present a check. It's a virtual check, but trust me, I will be sending the real check. So from this, we set aside entry fees, usually from certain classes. And since this year we had to do things a little differently, we still want to present a check for $500 to the Equine Science Center from the State Horse Show Committee and members. And we know that it's probably, you say every little bit helps. So we're very proud to do our share. Thank you all. This is a great, great program. Thank you, Dr. Malinowski. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Del. Love you.
It's a great evening. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Next year.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Almeida, for your generous donation, and a huge thank you to everyone from the 4-H Horse Project Advisory Committee. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Karyn Malinowski, Dr. Amy Butevich, and Mr. Kyle Hartman to present the Spirit of the Horse Award.
We can make him a doctor, Jennifer. It's okay. All right. I'm very proud to present this year's Spirit of the Horse Award to a wonderful friend. You guys all know and love Lynn Matthews. This award recognizes persons whose lives have been impacted by their involvement with horses and who continue to give back to horses in the equine industry. Lynn has served the equine industry throughout New Jersey for many years. She currently serves as the equine specialist for the New Jersey Department of Agriculture and the secretary of the New Jersey Equine Advisory Board. A little background on Lynn, though, before her days of Department of Ag. Lynn showed for the first time her pony named King Magic, a black pony named King Magic, and she won her class. And the award, the ribbon, was presented by, I would assume, Lynn, the then ringmaster, the ring steward, Colonel Marsh, who is a longtime supporter of equestrian sport in New Jersey, to Ms. Matthews. She also showed for a long time saddle seat equitation and pleasure as a junior rider, and was very successful to that end. And that's where she was involved again with Colonel Marsh and Dr. Neve and Gwen Stableford, all of the people who were involved in saddlebred horses at that time. We asked Secretary of Agriculture Doug Fisher about Lynn, and the quote was, "Lynn Matthews has served the equine community in New Jersey with great passion and commitment. She epitomizes the spirit of helping others, working hard, and getting results. In countless endeavors for horses in New Jersey, Lynn has benefited so many people and activities throughout the years." And, ladies and gentlemen, for over 30 years, Ms. Matthews has held numerous positions in the Department of Ag as the coordinator of the New Jersey Junior Breeder Program, the Ag Fair coordinator, as a member of the Animal Emergency Working Group, as well as her work as equine specialist for the department and the New Jersey Equine Advisory Board. In her spare time, I hope Rob is here tonight. Her husband, Rob, and Lynn own a small Christmas tree farm, and both volunteer untirelessly, because I hear that beeper going off all the time, as emergency medical technicians for over 30 years, as well as CPR and first aid instructors. The Spirit of the Horse Award represents the commitment that she has to the horse and the equine community. Congratulations, Lynn. We love you, and we would like you to say a few words at this time.
Thank you, everybody. This is the award. I don't know whether You can see it real well, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And I'd like to thank all of you for your countless support through the past 32 years with the Department of Agriculture. I especially want to thank the department, the boards that I work with, and my wonderful family for putting up with me being gone so much, so many weekends, so many hours, and I love what I do. So thank you, thank you, thank you again.
We love you, Lynn.
Love you too.
And thanks, Rob, for putting up with her.
Yes, I do.
Congratulations again, Ms. Matthews. I would now like to welcome Dr. Michael Westendorf for the presentation of the Gold Medal Horse Farm Award.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to be able to give out the Gold Medal Horse Farm Award today. This year, we're giving the award to Centenary University Equestrian Center. Again, just a little background on the Gold Medal Horse Farm. This was initiated about 10 years ago, 2012, when Equine Science Center, Ag Experiment Station, and the Department of Agriculture came together, and we determined we wanted to have an award given to outstanding environmental stewardship within the state of New Jersey. We agreed that we wanted the award to have some real rigor to it, so that the people that were chosen for the award, the farms that received the award, were not just outstanding management and successful farms, but outstanding environmental management. And I think through the years we've been able to do that. You can see some of the things that are required for getting the award. In addition to an application, you have to provide an environmental assessment on your farm. You have to document your farm's either animal waste management plan or a comprehensive nutrient management plan, and finally a site visit. And for our this year's winner, Centenary University, they did an excellent job in all of these, and I certainly enjoyed my site visit to the farm a few weeks ago, and a chance to visit and see the farm and take a few pictures. We don't have a sign prepared at this point to give to Kelly Munns, to Professor Munns, but the sign will be coming when the things cool down a little bit. Of course, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Centenary University Equestrian Center. It's a 64-acre equine facility located in Long Valley, New Jersey. And my wife and I took a drive up there a couple of weeks ago, and the fall color, it's a great place to visit. So if you ever get the chance, you should make the visit up there. They have outstanding student programs in equine studies and in animal health, and a world-renowned therapeutic riding program. They have several arenas. They have 2 indoor arenas, 1 outdoor arena, and a strong commitment to environmental stewardship. The center follows a comprehensive nutrient management plan, or CNMP. Some of those of you who've had experience with the USDA know that sometimes you have to get what's called a CNMP, and Centenary has had one of these on the books for many years. They did it with the assistance of the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. They make some innovative use of tools and know-how, and I particularly like this use of an old dairy farm barn cleaner. So maybe if you have had experience on dairy farms, Dr. Malinowski, you recognize what that is. And one of the barns, they empty it using a barn cleaner that's been adapted for use on their horse farm. So, there's many things similar to this at Centenary, where they've made taking some existing things and made good use of technology. They have a manure storage. Their manure is collected daily and goes into this facility, and it's removed quarterly, where it goes to a composting facility. And the farm also has a strong commitment to pasture management. I was very impressed. They take yearly soil samples, and they fertilize their land based on those soil samples. And you know, that's exemplary, because many farms in New Jersey do not take soil tests or regular soil tests, and they do that yearly. So farm management is a very proactive part of their farm. And I'll finish with this quote from Professor Munns. On behalf of everyone at the Centenary University Equestrian Center, we are honored to be receiving the Gold Medal Award for Equine Environmental Stewardship. It is our goal to continue appropriate manure management, pasture maintenance, and continue the best management practices for equine farms in New Jersey. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Professor Munns, and she can have a moment to make some comments to us. As I mentioned, the sign will be coming, and here.
Thank you, Dr. Westendorf, and thank you, Dr. Malinowski, for thinking of us back in earlier this summer when we originally started to talk about this. I do want to make note that Dr. Bruce Murphy, the president of Centenary University, is on as a participant this evening.
Oh, nice.
So he is here watching. Also is Dr. Lynn Taylor, who's an equine science faculty member here at Centenary University. So she's on as well. So shout out to my colleague. But on behalf of Dr. Murphy, we are so honored to receive this award. We certainly take a lot of pride in maintaining our facility and its beauty, and maintaining a lot of horses on a certain amount of property is always a challenge in New Jersey. But I think probably one of the things that originally, when I first met Dr. Westendorf when he came here a few years ago, was to look at our manure storage containment area, which we built over 10 years ago when New Jersey laws were requiring us to manage our manure differently. And we no longer had the luxury of spreading it on the farm next door, which is what we did for many years. So along with some great guidance from NRCS, and we were able to build our containment area. We were able to fund it, and it's worked very, very well for all these years. We built it in thinking that, you know, we like to use shavings right now, but if we ever wanted to convert to straw, that it would be large enough to handle the amount that we would create here with the number of horses that we have. So again, thank you, thank you. We're so honored to receive this award, and this has been a wonderful evening. I've enjoyed all the presentations, and it's been great to see everybody. Thank you.
Love you, Kelly.
Congratulations again to Centenary University Equestrian Center. In closing, we hope that everyone has enjoyed their night. We also want to take a minute to thank our partners, the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, the New Jersey Farm Bureau, and UMH Properties Incorporated. It is thanks to these partners that events like this can take place. As a reminder, we have 2 upcoming webinars next week on hay and are currently planning our events for next semester. Dr. Williams from the Department of Animal Sciences will also be teaching her equine nutrition course in the spring, which will be available as a certificate program and will also satisfy continuing education credits. Please be sure to follow us on Facebook for updates and visit our website, which lists all of our upcoming events and programs. Thank you for spending your evening with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everyone.